إعلان مهم.
重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Anuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Excellencias.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, a very good morning to all of you. I hereby declare open the 15th meeting of the 62nd session of the Human Rights Council. We will now begin the first panel of the annual full-day discussion on the human rights of women, which was mandated in Human Rights Council Resolutions 6/30, 59/20. The theme of this morning's panel will be domestic violence against women and girls. This debate is accessible to persons with disabilities through the provision of international sign interpretation and real-time captioning, together with other accessibility measures. I encourage those who may need reasonable accommodation to inform the Secretariat if they haven't done so already. It is my honor to welcome Ms. Awa Dabo, United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, who will deliver the opening statement. I'd also like to welcome our distinguished panelists, Ms. Petsili Toledo-Vasquez, member of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, Ms. Ivana Krtik, Vice Chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, Ms. Zulfia Baisakova, Chair of the Board of the Union of Crisis Centers of Kazakhstan, and Ms. Hishiyama Hamin, Campaign Manager of Global Campaign for Equality in Family Law. Excellencies, dear participants, the list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I encourage all speakers to intervene in an interactive way, present comments and ask questions that reflect the panelists' interventions and the discussion. The speaking time limit will, as usual, be at 1 minute and 30 seconds for all, and a maximum of 40 speakers will be accommodated. Delegates inscribed on the list of speakers who cannot take the floor because of time constraints can upload their statements to the online system to be posted on the extranet. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Awa Dabo. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, good morning. Today, somewhere in the world, a woman is afraid to go home after work. Another fears that if she flees abuse, she won't be able to provide for her children. Another has been made to believe that she and her needs are worthless. For hundreds of millions of women around the world, home has become a cage. Its bars can take many forms: physical, psychological, economic. And no country, no society, or income group is immune. The figures are well known, but they bear repeating. Nearly 1 in 3 women globally has experienced intimate partner and sexual violence in her lifetime, with almost no progress made in 2 decades. 60% of killings of women and girls are committed by partners or family members. This is approximately 137 mothers, wives, daughters, and sisters killed every single day. Women already pushed to the margins, those living in poverty and conflict, women from racial and ethnic and sexual minorities, women with disabilities, and migrant women are disproportionately represented in these figures. Many cases never come to light, and those do often go unpunished. A staggering 4 in 5 women and girls live in countries without robust legal protections against violence or where data is not available. Fewer than 40% of victims seek help of any kind, and less than 10% go to the police, fearing retaliation and stigma. Your Excellencies, domestic violence against women may unfold in the darkness of bedrooms and kitchens, but it is not a private matter. It is one of the world's most pervasive and accepted human rights violations. It reflects deeply entrenched systems of patriarchy, domination, and discrimination that have oppressed women for centuries. Today, an organized backlash against gender equality is reinforcing those patterns. And as technology, including AI, is increasingly misused to spread hatred anonymously, we are heading down a very dangerous path. Misogynistic content creeps into the phones of young men in every corner of the world, feeding their grievances. In the face of unemployment and uncertainty, solitude and frustration, toxic masculinity offers women and girls as a convenient scapegoat for society's ills. An estimated 99% of those targeted by AI deepfakes are women. Earlier this year, a shocking investigation uncovered a large online community where men shared tips on how to drug and rape their wives and get away with it. We are dealing with inventive, high-tech oppression. In my travels, I often talk to women and girls, and I realize just how much social media has been weaponized against them. And who knows how many women have decided not to run for office or to apply for senior public roles because they know it will make them a target. Unless we act now, online violence against women and girls has the potential to destroy entire societies and take women's hard-won social, economic, and political power away from them. Mr. Vice President, gender-based violence against women takes deeply disturbing forms, and it must not be treated as an unfortunate reality to be met with a shrug. It is an unacceptable injustice, and it must be met with outrage and action. And we know what works. We need comprehensive, coordinated, and well-funded systems to reach and protect women and girls trapped in a cycle of violence. The evidence is clear, law matters. When governments adopt legal protections against domestic violence, its prevalence nearly halves. Beyond laws, we need police that come, that listen, and that help, shelters that are well-resourced, support services that are accessible, and justice that is approachable and effective. It is critical that all mechanisms are created in consultation with survivors and instill trust. Recent high-profile cases, including those of Dominique Pellicot and Jeffrey Epstein and others, reignited public attention to the appalling scale of abuse that women endure. We need to ensure justice spares no perpetrator, including the most privileged and those hiding behind screens. And the same applies to technology companies that allow violence to thrive. Together with UN Women, our office has developed a model protocol for the investigation of femicides in Latin America. The protocol places women's rights at the core of proceedings and can provide guidance for regional and national courts. Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, we need to stand firm on the path to gender equality, defending progress and advancing it. Education and advocacy targeting women and girls and boys and men are tried and tested tools of prevention. So too is women's economic empowerment. We need to keep talking about domestic violence, and we need to keep challenging it. Together we can build a world where no woman fears going home. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, alta comisionada.
I thank the Deputy High Commissioner for her statement, and I would now like to give the floor to the panelists for their initial presentations. And I have the honor of giving the floor to Ms. Betsiri Toledo Vasquez. You have 7 minutes, madam. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists, excellencies. Thank you for inviting me to this important discussion. Under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and other international human rights treaties, gender-based violence against women constitutes a form of discrimination against women. This understanding, affirmed by the CEDAW Committee and international human rights courts, has been reflected in the practice of states parties for more than 3 decades too. Domestic violence is one of the most pervasive and devastating manifestations of gender-based violence against women and girls. It is neither a private matter nor an isolated phenomenon. Its impacts extend far beyond the individual victim and affects families, communities, and often multiple generations. One of the most extreme manifestations is the gender-related killing of women, also known as femicide. Across regions, women are most often killed by their intimate partners, former partners, or family members. And in many cases, femicide is the final stage of an escalating pattern of violence that could potentially have been identified and addressed earlier. These deaths are not inevitable, they are often preventable. The CEDAW Committee, through its General Recommendation number 35 and its recommendations to states parties, has consistently underscored that responses to domestic violence must involve all sectors of government. Effective action requires engagement not just by the judiciary, but also by health and educational systems, housing, child protection, and social services. Educational institutions play a fundamental role in challenging gender stereotypes and promoting relationships based on equality and respect. Health systems must recognize that domestic violence is often an underlying cause of multiple physical and mental health conditions and should provide safe and accessible pathways for disclosure and support. Working with men and boys at all levels of society is also essential in order to address domestic violence, and this includes educational initiatives, community-based programs, and collaboration with traditional and religious leaders in order to try and prevent repeat offending and promote accountability. For all that, legislation is a crucial starting point. Studies show that countries with specific domestic violence legislation report lower levels of intimate partner violence than those without such legislation. But legislation must be comprehensive and reflect the diversity of women's experiences. Domestic violence is not just physical assaults, it can also be coercion and control patterns aimed at depriving women of their autonomy and support networks, controlling their economic resources, inducing fear and dependency, psychological violence, economic violence, coercive control, stalking, intimidation, and threats can be as devastating as physical violence and frequently precede it. Research from countries has shown that when domestic violence homicides are reviewed, more than half involve evidence of prior economic abuse. Legislation must also eliminate discriminatory provisions that continue to justify domestic violence. We have repeatedly called within CEDAW for the repeal of the so-called defense of honor or the alleged victim provocation to be treated as mitigating circumstances. Legislative responses, of course, cannot be limited to criminal law. Domestic violence is increasingly facilitated through digital technologies. Perpetrators may use online platforms, and states should therefore adopt comprehensive legal and regulatory frameworks that include civil and administrative measures and ensure that digital intermediaries act responsibly when unlawful content is identified. But legislation is not enough. Institutions and systems designed to address domestic violence must function effectively in practice. Full commitment of all state agents and institutions is a central aspect of states' due diligence obligations. CEDAW has emphasized that professionals across all sectors should receive specialized and continuous training in order to respond adequately to domestic violence. Such training should include understanding trauma and its effects, the dynamics of domestic violence, and the diverse circumstances faced by women experiencing violence, including for those subjected to multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, such as Indigenous women, migrant women, women with disabilities, and older women. This also includes cases where women with a history of domestic abuse and trauma come into contact with the criminal justice system and are accused of crimes. Gender stereotypes continue to shape institutional responses and often prevent victims from receiving adequate protection, particularly those from marginalized groups. Stereotypes about what constitutes domestic violence and how victims should behave, including that they should initiate legal actions to access protection, lead to secondary victimization. It also weakens confidence in institutions and ultimately compromises access to justice and protection. Attacks against children are not separate from domestic violence against women. They are often part of the same continuum of coercion and control. Perpetrators frequently use children as instruments of control and abuse, and violence against them may be inflicted specifically to punish, intimidate, or cause suffering to their mothers. In its most extreme forms, children themselves may become victims of lethal violence in the context of violence against women. Accordingly, custody, visit rights, and family law arrangements should never expose women and children to further harm. Coordination among institutions is also essential. Often, deficiencies in coordination between authorities reflect broader structural inequalities, failures that often undermine women from marginalized groups in terms of their access to protection and justice. Finally, learning from past failures is essential to preventing future violence. In-depth reviews of femicides and other domestic violence deaths constitutes a promising practice in many jurisdictions. By looking at the circumstances surrounding these deaths and involving families and communities and relevant institutions, these reviews help pinpoint systemic gaps, improve risk assessment, strengthen interagency coordination, and promote institutional learning. Domestic violence is not an individual problem. It is a social problem that requires social responses involving all sectors and all of society. Let's work together to ensure that domestic violence is no longer tolerated and that all women and children can live lives free from fear and violence. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now have the honor to give the floor to Ms. Ivana Kristic.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, it is an honor to address you today on behalf of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. At the heart of this discussion, it's not only how to respond to domestic violence, but also to understand it as a manifestation of discrimination, inequality, and control in the lives of women and girls. Domestic violence is not a private matter. It is not an isolated family conflict. It is not merely individual misconduct. It is violence rooted in unequal power relations, harmful stereotypes, and the belief that women and girls may be controlled, disciplined, silenced, and subordinated within intimate and family relationships. It is one of the ways in which discrimination is enforced in everyday life. It restricts women's and girls' choices. It limits their education, work, health, mobility, autonomy, and participation. It undermines economic independence and isolates survivors from support. For girls, violence in the family may mean interrupted schooling, early pregnancy, child marriage, sexual abuse, and lifelong trauma. For women, it may mean loss of employment, housing, custody, bodily autonomy, social networking, and trust in institutions. Domestic violence, therefore, not only harms individual women and girls, it holds them back, reproduces inequality across generations, and weakens society as a whole. Throughout its mandate, the Working Group has seen in all regions that discrimination against women and girls often begins in the family. The family can and should be a place of care, affection, and support. Yet, it may also be the first place where women and girls learn their bodies, choices, sexuality, movements, and voices are subjected to control. This is why domestic violence is so deeply connected to women's unequal status in family life, economic dependence, harmful practices, discriminatory norms, backlash against women's rights, and the persistent failure to achieve substantive equality. It is also why domestic violence is so difficult to combat. Women and girls are often trapped not only by violence itself, but by the structures surrounding it. They may depend economically on the perpetrator. They may fear losing their children, their home, their resistance status, their livelihood, or their community. They may face stigma, threat of retaliation, pressure to preserve the family, or pressure to reconcile. They may also know that reporting violence will not necessarily bring protection. The barriers are legal, institutional, social, economic. In some states, there is still no specific legislation on domestic violence. Where legislation exists, definitions may be too narrow. Laws may fail to cover all forms of violence. They may not recognize violence by former partners, siblings, extended family members, or persons who do not live in the same household. They may not reflect diverse family forms or relationships that are not formally recognized by law. As a result, many women and girls remain outside the protection of the legal framework. Even when laws are strong, implementation often remains weak. Survivors may still encounter disbelief, stigma, victim blaming, and pressure to reconcile. Police may fail to assess risk or provide immediate protection. Prosecutors may minimize harm. Judges may rely on stereotypes about marriage, motherhood, sexuality, or proper female behavior. Shelters may be unavailable, inaccessible, or unsafe. Legal aid may be limited. Services may be fragmented, and perpetrators may act with impunity. When this happens, the law exists, but protection does not. Equality is proclaimed, but not experienced. Many states have also adopted strategies, action plans, and policy documents on domestic violence. These are important, but they are not enough if they are not based on proper assessment, reliable data, adequate funding, and independent monitoring. Too often, policies are adopted without a clear understanding of who is affected, where protection fails, which groups face the greatest barriers, and whether measures actually work in practice. This is particularly important from an intersectional perspective, as the risks are not the same for all women and girls. Those facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination are often more exposed to violence and less able to access protection. For many of them, violence is intensified by isolation, inaccessible services, language barriers, economic dependence, fear of deportation, discriminatory policing, lack of responsible accommodation, community stigma, or mistrust in institutions. Domestic violence is also no longer confined to physical space. Digital technologies are increasingly used to extend coercive control beyond the home and beyond separation. Perpetrators may track phones, monitor accounts, steal passwords, misuse location data, install spyware, control digital communications, impersonate survivors online, threaten to share intimate images, or use children's devices and online accounts to continue harassment. This is not a secondary or less serious form of harm. Digital violence can deepen fear, isolation, and dependency. It can prevent women from seeking help, maintaining employment, continuing education, participating in public life, or rebuilding their lives after violence. it can expose survivors to stigma, reputational harm, blackmail, economic loss, and renewed physical danger. Digital violence is therefore not separate from domestic violence. Women and girls do not ask for safety as a privilege. They are entitled to live free from violence in the family, in society, and in digital space. Our task is to dismantle discrimination that makes such violence possible, tolerated, and repeated. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tiene ahora...
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Zulfia Isakova. Distinguished Deputy President and late distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to take part in this discussion on one of the most serious and widespread human rights violations, namely domestic violence against women and girls. As a chairperson of the board of the Union of Crisis Centers of Kazakhstan, which brings together organizations providing assistance to survivors of violence, I'd like to share with you the experience of our country and practical insights that are based on many years of work. Today, Kazakhstan has 50 crisis centers, including 37 licensed centers, which have the right to provide rehabilitation and social reintegration services to victims of domestic violence with financial support from the state. In 2024, Kazakhstan took a significant step to improve its legislation for combating domestic violence. These reforms increased accountability for violence, expanded protection measures for survivors, and reaffirmed the state's commitment to the principle that violence cannot be justified by any traditions, cultural practices, or family circumstances. However, Kazakhstan's experience, like that of many other countries, shows that adopting legislation is only the first step. Achieving meaningful results requires effective implementation of mechanisms and sustainable financing of social services and strong interagency cooperation. Over more than 30 years of our crisis centers operating, we have learned that women seek help not only because of the violence itself. Often they simultaneously face economic dependence, lack of housing, psychological trauma, and the responsibility of caring for children. For this reason, support for survivors must be comprehensive. Every year, crisis centers across Kazakhstan provide tens of thousands of services to people affected by violence. In fact, there have been more than 130,000 cases of services provided, and more than 9,000 people each year receive temporary accommodation and safe shelter. These figures confirm the need for the continued development of support systems for survivors. Special attention must also be paid to children who witness violence within the family. According to a study conducted by the Union of Crisis Centers of Kazakhstan in 2024, 1 in 6 children is a witness of domestic violence. Even if the child itself does not suffer domestic violence themselves, just being within a context where there is violence deals a severe blow to their psychological and often physical development. Therefore, we need to not only address the primary causes of harm, but also create the conditions in which a child will not be forced to witness domestic violence within their own family. For many years, the primary focus has been on protection and rehabilitation of survivors. However, sustainable reductions in violence cannot be achieved without changing the behavior of perpetrators. Over the past 2 years, Kazakhstan has introduced a risk assessment system for identifying the risks of repeated violence on the basis of the ODARA system. The next step is the development of programs aimed at changing perpetrators' behavior and fostering a sense of responsibility towards their family members. Since April 2026, the city of Almaty has been implementing a pilot project entitled Intervention Center for Work with Perpetrators. Perpetrators are sent on the basis of a court referral. There are police inspectors involved and specialists from the healthcare system and the crisis centres network, and they provide support to the victim as well. I'd like to underscore that there are 26 participants currently going through this programme, supported by 19 experts working on the principle of co-therapy. Practice has shown that many women would want to preserve their family if their violence ended and their safety was ensured. Therefore, the perpetrator behaviour redress programme is part of our state policy aimed at preventing repeat violence. But despite the progress achieved, Kazakhstan is facing a number of major challenges. First of all, we need to discuss the adoption of a law on preventing domestic violence, which would ensure a comprehensive response to the issue of protecting the victims through interagency cooperation. Secondly, there is another issue regarding the fact that we need to address the crimes committed in the context of domestic violence. Distinguished colleagues, international standards, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and CEDAW recommendations, provide states with clear guidance for action. However, in order to achieve sustainable responses, you don't just need laws and a strategy, but a constant exchange of experience between countries, experts, and civil society organizations. That is why the Union of Crisis Centers of Kazakhstan annually organizes activities within the framework of the international campaign called 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. On the 25th of November this year, the next Central Asian Conference will be held in Almaty. This is an annual regional platform of great significance, and I'd like to invite representatives of international organizations and experts and civil society organizations from Central Asia who attend, and I invite all participants here to join the conference. It's important for us that these platforms become a place for open dialogue where we can raise the most complex issues and discuss practical solutions and form recommendations which can then be implemented both at the national and at the international levels. I thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Miahamin.
Good morning, Excellencies and delegates. Thank you for this opportunity. I speak on behalf of the Global Campaign for Equality in Family Laws, a coalition of women's rights, human rights, and faith-based organizations with the Secretariat at Equality Now, working across religions and cultures towards one goal: equality in family law, policies, and practices. Today, I want to share a case from my home country, Sri Lanka, that exposes how discriminatory family laws directly exacerbate domestic violence. A 16-year-old Sri Lankan girl was removed from school and forced into child marriage to a 27-year-old man. Under the current Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act, there is no minimum age of marriage, and the law requires neither the bride's written consent nor her physical presence at the ceremony. Salma's husband was violent from the start. She endured it, believing her religion required her to bear the abuse. His violence led her to be hospitalized at least twice, the second time while she was 9 months pregnant. She lost her baby. 5 months after the second baby was born, her husband abandoned her. When Salma went to the Qazi, or community judge, to apply for child maintenance, she was met with little sympathy. The judge ordered her husband to pay just rupees 1,500 or $4 a month in child support on the basis that he had remarried and had another family to support. But her suffering did not end there. Under the law, divorce processes remain highly unequal. Women have the additional burden of bringing witnesses and evidence to corroborate harm, while men can obtain divorce quickly without any reasons given. The divorce took over 2 years to complete. Women's rights groups have been advocating for reform of the family law for 40 years now, and there are ongoing efforts by the Sri Lankan government, and we hope these reforms will be prioritized soon. But this is not an isolated story. Behind every act of violence lies a system of inequality, a web of discriminatory laws, practices, and policies governing family life. The World Bank Women, Business and the Law 2026 report tells us that 144 countries lack adequate legislation on child marriage. 19 countries legally require women to obey their husbands, and 45 discriminate against women in divorce. Discriminatory marital property and inheritance rights further entrench inequality, leaving women economically vulnerable and unable to leave abusive marriages and unions. But 29 countries still prevent women from being recognized as heads of household, and 42 deny those equal inheritance rights. This is a global pattern. In Africa, overlapping civil, customary, and religious legal systems leave women navigating contradicting frameworks that deny them equality. In Arab states, male guardianship system legally requires women to obtain a man's permission to marry, to travel, and work. In Latin America, women reporting abuse to family courts find themselves counter-accused of parental alienation, punished for seeking protection, and denied custody of children on false claims. And across Asia Pacific, unequal laws embed inequality within the family itself. What is clear from these examples is that where the law subordinates women in the family, violence often follows. In a world of polycrisis, climate shocks, conflict, humanitarian emergencies, these gaps widen further. But we know what works. The most effective responses to domestic violence are those that address the power imbalance directly. Studies have shown in India, for example, Hindu Succession Amendment Act, which gave women equal right to inherit land, had measurable impacts on the reduction of violence against women. In Egypt, the introduction of the Khul right, allowing women to file for unilateral no-fault divorce under Islamic law, led to measurable decrease in domestic abuse. The evidence is clear. Legal reforms that give women rights and autonomy within family do not simply reduce violence, they dismantle the power structure and norms that make violence possible in the first place. In that spirit, I would like to offer 3 key recommendations. First, addressing domestic violence begins with reforming discriminatory laws. States must ensure equal protection for all citizens under family law, regardless of sex, religion, ethnicity, or tradition. An absolute ban on child and forced marriage, free and full consent in marriage, equal rights within marriage and unions to work, own assets, and maintain financial autonomy, and equal grounds for divorce and dissolution of marriage and unions as required under international law. Second, domestic violence laws and family laws must advance together. A strong domestic violence law sitting alongside a discriminatory family law creates contradiction, not protection. Court systems must be reformed in tandem, trauma-informed, accessible, and survivor-centered, so that every person who enters the justice system, whether fleeing violence, seeking divorce, or child custody, is met with fairness and care. Third, the international community must make egalitarian family laws a non-negotiable pillar of the global gender equality agenda, not a footnote, not a regional or religious exception, a core strategy. Behind every survivor like Salma is a system that failed her. Behind that system is a law that a government chose not to reform or implement. You cannot build equality, dignity, and safety on the foundation of inequality. Equality in the family means equality in society. Excellencies, the floor is yours, as is the responsibility. Thank you.
Muchas gracias y agradezco a
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all panelists for their contributions. Excellencies, dear participants, we will now proceed with the first segment of the list of speakers. All interventions from the floor are limited to 1 minute and 30 seconds. The list of speakers is now closed. I give the floor first to the distinguished ambassador of the European Union.
Mr. Vice President, the European Union remains deeply concerned by the persistence of domestic and intimate partner violence against women and girls, constituting some of the most widespread forms of gender-based violence and a serious violation of human rights. The EU supports women's equal, full, effective, and meaningful participation in all their diversity in all spheres of public and political life. Violence against women and girls is rooted in structural inequalities, unequal power relations, and discriminatory social norms. The EU is working to prevent violence, protect survivors, and strengthen accountability. Within the EU, a landmark directive adopted in 2024 on combating violence against women and domestic violence establishes a framework to strengthen prevention, protection of victims and survivors, and access to justice. Moreover, the EU's accession to the Istanbul Convention in 2023 strengthened our commitment to eliminate sexual and gender-based violence. Beyond our borders, the Commission's Gender Action Plan 3 places ending sexual and gender-based violence at the heart of the EU's external action. The EU also partners with the UN through the Spotlight Initiative in the world's largest effort to eliminate violence against women and girls by strengthening legislation, services, and prevention efforts. Mr. Vice President, how can states translate international standards as outlined in CEDAW and General Comment number 35 into survivor-centered responses? Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished ambassador of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Northern Ireland, who will speak on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Vice President. The UK delivers this joint statement on behalf of Australia, Brazil, Jamaica, Morocco, Spain, and South Africa. Across the world, violence against women and girls persists, with 1 in 3 experiencing physical and/or sexual violence over their lifetime. We must address this global and national emergency. The UK, together with Australia, Brazil, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Jamaica, Morocco, Spain, and South Africa, have launched an international coalition to end violence against women and girls. We will collaborate to prevent all forms of gender-based violence, including online and offline, so that women and girls can live free from fear, no matter who or where they are. Through this coalition, we will accelerate action by strengthening national responses, sharing expertise, and enhancing global leadership to prevent violence, protect victims and survivors, and hold perpetrators to account. Moreover, as the world faces increasing conflict, we will look to strengthen global efforts to prevent sexual violence in conflict and other forms of violence in humanitarian crises. Progress requires sustained political leadership and a multi-stakeholder approach. We call on all states to step up efforts to end gender-based violence, including by scaling up evidence-based prevention and response activities, and ensuring accountability for all perpetrators. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The distinguished ambassador of Estonia, speaking on behalf of a group of countries, has the floor.
Mr. Vice President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Nordic and Baltic states. We thank all panelists for their insightful contributions. For far too many people, the home remains the most dangerous place. Domestic and intimate partner violence represents severe and pervasive violations of human rights, undermining the dignity, security, and well-being of those affected, with no region immune to its devastating impact. While anybody can be a victim of intimate partner violence and sexual and gender-based violence, women and girls are overwhelmingly represented among victims and survivors, both online and offline. Intimate partner violence is by far the most prevalent form of violence against women and girls. Every 10 minutes, one woman or girl is killed by their intimate partner or family member. For the Nordic-Baltic states, combating domestic and gender-based violence are our key priorities. Violence against women and girls is not inevitable. We can change this. We need robust legislation, improved data collection, greater government accountability, and a zero-tolerance culture. Survivors must have access to comprehensive survivor-centered support services, including healthcare, sexual and reproductive health services, psychological support, legal assistance, and safe shelters. Distinguished panelists, how can the Human Rights Council further accelerate the global effort to prevent and eliminate domestic violence? I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The distinguished representative of Kenya, speaking on behalf of a group of African states, has the floor.
Mr. Vice President, the African Group welcomes this discussion and thanks the panelists for the quality of their contributions. The African Group is concerned about the persistence of domestic violence against women and girls, one of the most prevalent forms of gender-based violence. This violence has devastating consequences for victims who face significant barriers to accessing protection and justice. In Africa, the victims of this violence continue to face this obstacle despite the efforts undertaken by many states. We recognize the need for an integrated approach to address these types of violence. In this regard, we welcome the African Union's adoption of the Convention on the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls in February 2025. This landmark instrument complements the measures already undertaken by Africa to eradicate violence against women and girls. including domestic violence. Among other obligations, it requires states to provide appropriate responses to these types of violence by adopting integrated approaches that combine prevention, protection, access to justice, accountability, and support services for victims. Finally, the African Group calls for the strengthened international cooperation to prevent this violence and to support survivors by adopting a victim-centered approach. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The distinguished ambassador of Afghanistan on behalf of a group of countries has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. On behalf of Afghanistan and a cross-regional group of 37 states, we bring to this Council's attention the deteriorating situation of women and girls in Afghanistan who continue to be subjected to a system of oppression, exclusion, gender-based discrimination in clear violation of international human rights law. Women are being excluded from education for the 5th consecutive academic year, as well as from employment, essential services, public life, and humanitarian space. Their rights and freedoms are further curtailed through restriction on movements, censorship, surveillance, morality policing, and detention. These abuses are further entrenched by discriminatory legal frameworks. Decree number 12 of the Taliban normalizes domestic violence by permitting corporal punishment, while Decree number 18 enables child marriage. Mr. President, Vice President, the crisis is structural, systematic, and gendered in intent and effect, with generational and already irreversible consequences, undermining the autonomy and the dignity of women and girls in Afghanistan, and institutionalizing a systemic and multi-sectoral campaign of gender persecution as understood in international law. We urge the Council and the international community to act with urgency, sustain support for a special rapporteur and IIM Afghanistan, advancing accountability, strengthening support for women-led and civil society and women most at risk. A full statement and
Thank you. The distinguished representative of the Democratic Republic of Congo, speaking on behalf of a group of countries, has the floor.
Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Vice President, I take the floor today on behalf of Ivory Coast, the Dominican Republic, Antigua and Barbuda, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, Switzerland, Romania, and my own country, the DRC, along with a few other countries, to draw the attention of the Council on a fact that is still not fully taken into account in peace and security efforts and for the promotion of human rights, to wit, domestic violence against women and girls in the context of conflict and post-conflict. Domestic violence does not end with a ceasefire. Much information shows that often in cases of conflict, these violence continues. And it brings violence from the battlefield to the household. We welcome General Recommendation 35 of CEDAW to prevent and provide reparation to gender-based violence victims, as well as General Recommendation 30 on the link between women's rights, the prevention of conflict, and peace building. We call on states and the Council to, one, reiterate the full implementation of these recommendations in the context of conflict and post-conflict, to provide financing, this is second, for peace building in programs for the prevention of domestic violence, and three, to support mechanisms for gathering disaggregated data on violence against women and girls in conflict situations. And we should make combating gender violence a priority for a free, peaceful, and resilient society. The full statement will be published on the extranet. Thank you. Distinguished Ambassador of Kazakhstan, speaking on behalf of a group of countries, has the floor.
Then Kazakhstan has the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 32 states. We welcome today's discussion on preventing and eliminating domestic violence against women and girls, convened pursuant to the Human Rights Council Resolution 57/18, initiated in 2024 by Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. We thank the panelists for their valuable contributions. Domestic violence remains a serious concern, undermining the rights to life, security, health, dignity, equality, and non-discrimination, with lasting consequences for victims' families and communities. An effective response requires a comprehensive, coordinated, and survivor-centered approach. This includes prevention, early identification of risks, timely protection of victims, access to justice, accountability of perpetrators, and support and recovery services. We underline the essential role of crisis centers, hotlines, temporary shelters, and one-stop services as well as access to legal, medical, psychological, and social assistance. Such services must be accessible, safe, confidential, adequately resourced, and responsive to the needs of women and girls, including those in vulnerable situations. We further stress the importance of effective coordination among law enforcement, social services, healthcare institutions, local authorities, and civil society organizations. In conclusion, we ask the panelists what the model of interagency coordination have proven most
Gracias.
effective.
Tiene la palabra la
Thank you, distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice.
Thank you, Vice President. Switzerland would like to thank you for organizing this debate. Domestic violence against women and girls is a violation of human rights and remains one of the most severe and widespread expressions of gender-based violence. When experiencing violence within the household, a place where they're supposed to be safe and protected, it is mainly their autonomy and their ability to participate in both private and public life that is deeply curtailed. Switzerland remains quite concerned by the extent of this phenomenon, including in its own territory. Infractions related to domestic violence, including feminicides, has led us to take urgent measures. We have stepped up our prevention and awareness-raising efforts by improving our legal framework and criminal law and for the protection of victims by setting up a national hotline for help. Early detection of violence remains the weakest link in the protection chain. Switzerland is convinced that structured training of professionals who are on the front line with victims is essential for the efficiency of protection mechanisms. Dear panelists, how do you think that human rights mechanisms can contribute to better highlight domestic violence that is still invisible due to the low number of reported cases or difficult access to justice in order to ensure that national responses are better tailored to the realities experienced by victims? Thank you. Distinguished representative of Belgium has the floor.
Mr. President, Belgium aligning itself with the statement of the European Union and would like to add the following elements. Femicide, the intentional killing of a woman or girl because of her gender, is the most extreme manifestation of gender-based violence. It is not an isolated act, but happens in the context of structural gender inequality, discrimination, and systemic failures. In 2023, Belgium adopted a femicide law. On top of sending a clear political signal, the law strengthens visibility, improves data collection, and reinforces accountability. It is a clear sign of Belgium's unwavering commitment to end gender-based violence. For more than 2 decades, Belgium has pursued and strengthened an integrated approach through successive national action plans. These are firmly grounded in the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, with an approach structured around prevention, protection, prosecution, and coordinated policies. Implementing the Istanbul Convention has strengthened Belgium's response to gender-based violence, and we call on other countries to do the same, as the convention is also open for countries outside of Europe. Dear panelists, every femicide represents a collective failure to act in time. How to ensure better collaboration between governments, civil society, academia, independent expert mechanism, and international organization. Thank you.
Thank you. The distinguished ambassador for female foreign policy of Spain is recognized. Thank you, Mr. President. Spain would like to endorse the statement made by the European Union. 24 women have been murdered in Spain since January 1st, 2026, and only 25 weeks of 2026. And along with them, 3 minors have been victims of vicarious violence. These are not just figures, these are human beings. But putting together statistics allows us to understand the extent of the phenomenon and to combat this social scourge. These statistics show that violence against women continues to be one of the most widespread and persistent human rights violations of the present time. Combating it calls for comprehensive, sustained, and well-tailored responses to the reality faced by women and girls. Spain upholds a strong commitment to the eradication of gender violence, and this commitment has allowed us to renew the Compact Against Gender Violence with the support of all parliamentary groups except for the extreme right, which is the nihilist. This is accompanied by greater commitment by providing public resources to ensure the effective enforcement of the agreed measures and to improve the care services and the protection offered to victims. This new agreement has fundamental priorities to address current challenges, combating violence in the digital realm, for example, vicarious struggle, which is the violence exerted against children and on children in order to continue to exert damage to the mothers. Violence against women is not unavoidable. It is a result of inequality. Thank you very much. The Ambassador of Mexico is recognized. Thank you, Vice President. We would like to thank the panelists for their presentations. In Mexico, the eradication of all forms of gender violence is a state priority. In order to face domestic violence, we continue to work towards bringing about a cultural change where young men, boys, and men can be allies. At the same time, we have a preventive care and access to justice approach with a human rights perspective and a cross-cutting nature. The Women's Department promotes initiatives with a community approach, such as the strategy for women who weave peace. This creates local networks for supporting the social fabric and providing assistance. We also have centers where we provide services to women victims of violence, including domestic violence. In 2025, we had 678 such centers, and this year we plan on having 323 additional ones. As we combat domestic violence, we realize that it is an ineluctable obligation to guarantee equality and dignity for all women and girls. Thank you.
Gracias. Y la palabra.
Thank you. The distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the floor. Thank you, Vice President. As a territory of peace, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela maintains strong commitment with the protection of women and girls. Our country has a strong legal and institutional framework, beginning with the organic law on women's rights to a life free from violence, which sets forth prevention, protection, comprehensive care, and punishing mechanisms for various types of gender-based violence. These efforts are complemented with specialized courts and public policies aimed at empowering women and make them autonomous. In spite of these great efforts, we cannot ignore external factors that have an impact on the human rights of women. We're thinking about the illegal, unilateral coercive measures imposed against developing countries that limit access to essential resources for health, for social protection, and for the full enjoyment of human rights. We issue an appeal to the international community to redouble its efforts in order to prevent and eradicate gender-based violence, to combat impunity, and to guarantee effective reparation for victims, in addition to rejecting the use of unilateral coercive measures which run against the principles of international law and which violate the UN Charter. Thank you very much, Vice President. Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize the representative of UN Women.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As we heard from the panel, international human rights frameworks provide concrete and actionable guidance to end violence against women and girls. CEDAW, and particularly its general recommendations 19 and 35, together with key Human Rights Council resolutions, set out standards requiring states to address root causes, protect survivors, ensure access to justice and effective remedies, and guarantee accountability. These frameworks also affirm states' due diligence obligations for acts by public and private actors, including in the world of work, and call for coordinated multi-sectoral and survivor-centered systems that uphold safety, dignity, and agency. The Beijing Plus 30 review underscored the urgency of accelerating implementation, yet prevention is under-prioritized, services are fragmented, barriers to justice persist, and evolving technologies are shaping patterns of violence. Only 0.2% of global aid is directed to addressing violence against women, leaving women's rights organizations central to prevention, service delivery, and accountability severely underfunded. A shift from commitments to implementation is needed to strengthen accountability, scale prevention, and coordinate survivor-centered national systems that address both online and offline violence. UN Women stands ready to contribute from the global, local, regional levels and from its normative coordination and operational mandate. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the representative of UNICEF.
President, UNICEF and WHO welcome this opportunity to draw attention to the unacceptable levels of violence women and girls experience in the home, a place that should be safe. 692 million women and girls 15 and older have experienced intimate partner violence in their lifetime, a number that has remained largely unchanged for 2 decades. Intimate partner violence is the 4th leading risk factor for women's health. Children are also harmed. 1 in 4 children globally live with a mother or female caregiver experiencing partner violence, with risk to their health, well-being, and safety. In households where women experience violence, children are more likely to experience abuse, and vice versa. At a time of pushback on women's and children's rights, UNICEF and WHO call on states to rely on evidence-based programs to scale up efforts to prevent domestic violence, applying the multi-agency Respect Women and Inspire prevention frameworks. We also call on states to comply with their obligations under international human rights law to strengthen health and child protection systems as key entry points for victim survivor-centered care, and to increase the coordination of efforts to address violence against women and violence against children. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Now, the representative of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions has the floor.
Mr. President, Geneva thanks the panelists for their valuable contributions. Domestic violence against women and girls remains one of the most widespread and persistent human rights violations worldwide, despite existing legal frameworks and international standards. Women and girls also face intersecting forms of discrimination, including women with disabilities, indigenous women, migrant women, and women living in poverty, which often engender additional obstacles in seeking protection and redress. Geneva's 2025 outcome statement reaffirms this reality and stresses on the importance of upholding related international human rights commitments to ensure the full realization of women and girls' rights. Paris Principles compliant NHRs play an important role in addressing these challenges through monitoring, investigation, complaints handling, reporting, advocacy, and awareness raising. NHRs help and identify protection gaps, strengthen accountability, and promote survivor-centered responses. Geneva calls on states to ensure that NHRs have the mandate, resources to fulfill this role, grant their participation in CSW proceedings, and strengthen cooperation with them and civil society organizations in the design, implementation, and monitoring of laws and policies addressing domestic violence. Finally, what measures have proven most effective in ensuring meaningful cooperation between states, NHRs, and survivor-led organizations to improve prevention, protection, and accountability in cases of domestic violence? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Now we will have a video statement from the Independent Commission for Human Rights from the State of Palestine.
President, ladies and gentlemen, ICHR welcomes this discussion on gender-based violence against women and girls in conflict, post-conflict, and the humanitarian settings. The report rightly stresses that such violence is not inevitable. It is enabled by inequality, militarization, the collapse of protection systems, and persistent impunity. In the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly in Gaza, women and girls face extreme vulnerability amid mass displacement and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Displaced women and children live in overcrowded shelters where safety, privacy, dignity, and protection are severely compromised. The collapse of the healthcare system has also deprived survivors and women at risk access to reproductive healthcare, psychosocial support, legal assistance, and essential protection services. We are also deeply concerned by reports regarding the treatment of Palestinian women and girls in Israeli detention in conditions marked by limited oversight and lack of effective accountability. In the West Bank, military operations, settler terrorism, and movement restrictions further limit women's access to protection, justice, and remedies. ICHR urges states to ensure prompt, independent, and impartial investigations into all documented incidents of conflict-related gender-based violence and support Palestinian women and organizations working on the front lines. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Équilibre et Population for a joint.
Monsieur le Président,
President, I'm speaking on behalf of the Francophone Feminist Alliance, which is striving to make the voice of Francophone activists heard within multilateral fora. Far from being an isolated issue, domestic violence is a serious human rights violation and is part of a continuum of gender-based violence that goes from forced marriage to domestic violence, from incest to intramarriage violence. The autonomy of women and girls are undermined, and the consequences of such violence is great. there is a physical and psychological trauma, school dropout, issues affecting their health and their future. Women and women with disabilities face specific obstacles in terms of accessing justice and healthcare and support mechanisms. While we are celebrating the month of the child in several African countries, and I'd like to recall that when girls grow up in fear, it's an entire society that is depriving itself of their potential. The backlash is such that no society can then make a claim on development and justice if their girls and women are living in fear. We call for the criminal justice system to be properly leveraged and to ensure that girls and women benefit from quality services, including in terms of reproductive and sexual health. We need to also address stereotypes and structural issues and address issues in the digital sphere. Women and girls' rights are essential for building a just and inclusive and equal society. Thank you. I give the floor to Equality Now.
Your Excellencies and fellow advocates, I speak on behalf of Equality Now and the Hurra Coalition, a growing movement of 18 women's rights organizations across 9 Arab states, confronting discriminatory family law and the violence it sustains. Domestic violence does not happen in a legal vacuum. Discriminatory family laws, such as unequal guardianship, custody and divorce rules, and child marriage, reinforces the power imbalances that lets abuse persist. In Gaza, at least 400 girls aged 14 to 16 were granted marriage permits only 4 months in 2025, likely only a fraction of the true number. Over 2 years of war and humanitarian crisis have turned the unreformed discriminatory family law into a direct gateway to child marriage, exposing children, especially girls, to the sexual and physical violence it conceals. Across all regions, women have lost their lives protecting survivors of this same violence. Our fellow advocate, Yanar Muhammad from Iraq, who was assassinated earlier this year, and no one has been held accountable. Her killing is a warning sign of the rise of anti-rights movements. Reforming inequality in family law and gender-based violence as intertwined issues is a priority, especially in times of crisis and instability. We call on this Council and member states to protect women human rights defenders, prioritize family law reform, including within humanitarian and reconstruction plans, and allocate resources to frontline women's rights organizations. Accountability and reparation for the violations of women's and girls' rights cannot wait for peace. Thank you.
Gracias. A continuación.
Thank you. We will now hear a video from Advocates for Human Rights.
The Advocates for Human Rights welcomes the Human Rights Council's attention to the elimination of domestic violence, including through Resolution 5718. Domestic violence is a pattern of abuse used to exert power and control within an intimate family or household relationship. Preventing domestic violence requires a comprehensive approach, including public education, victim services, training for frontline responders, and measures to address harmful social norms. A strong legal framework is essential. States should enact and effectively implement laws that prioritize victim safety and ensure accountability for perpetrators. At minimum, survivors should have access to civil protection orders that provide meaningful remedies, including no contact orders, removal of the perpetrator from a shared residence, temporary child custody arrangements, financial support, and protection for other family members. Importantly, the law should grant survivors the choice whether and when to seek such protections. Criminal justice systems should provide appropriate accountability measures, including sanctions proportionate to the offense and restrictions on access to firearms. At times, an appropriate criminal response may call for options beyond carceral approaches, such as court-ordered domestic abuse programming. Throughout all proceedings, justice systems should adopt survivor-centered, trauma-informed approaches that respect the autonomy, dignity, and safety of those affected by domestic violence. Thank you.
A continuación.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative Sambali Trust.
As raised by Mrs. Christich, domestic violence is not only a private family matter. It is a human rights concern that affects safety, health, education, livelihood, and the dignity of women and children. In many communities, women remain silent because they fear blame, financial insecurity, family pressure, or lack of support. Sambali Trust works in northern India with marginalized asylum seekers and deprived women and girls through the Niraya Project, an emergency helpline, and empowerment centers in which counseling, legal guidance, rights awareness, and livelihood training is provided. India has legal frameworks women's helplines, protection systems, legal services, and public institutions to respond to violence, which support our work. Civil society organizations play a bridge role by offering trust, follow-up, and culturally sensitive support. Vice President, Sambali Trust also believes prevention must begin early. Our work with adolescent girls and children, including safe touch awareness and life skills education, help young people understand boundaries, consent, and respect. We applaud the United Nations for keeping women's rights at the forefront of the global agenda. We look forward to a world where every girl is born into freedom. No one should fear going back home. Dhanyavad.
Gracias. Hemos incluido.
Thank you. That has concluded the first segment of the list of speakers, and we will now go back to the list of states, and I give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Vice President. Australia thanks the panellists for their important contributions. Domestic violence against women and girls, including intimate partner violence, remains one of the most widespread human rights violations globally. It denies women and girls their rights to safety, dignity, and participation. High rates of gender-based violence in all countries highlight the urgent need for more effective action at both national and regional levels. Through its National Plan 2022 to 2032, Australia's approach to ending violence against women and children spans prevention, early intervention, response, recovery, and healing. Ending gender-based violence is the first priority under our National Gender Equality Strategy. Since 2022, Australia has invested $4.4 billion to take action to end family, domestic, and sexual violence. Internationally, we're working with partners to drive progress, including with increased funding for frontline services in the Pacific and through the International Coalition to End Violence Against Women and Girls. Together, we must accelerate prevention, shift harmful norms, and ensure accountability. We ask, how can international partnerships accelerate and scale domestic violence prevention and response? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, Vice President. Canada welcomes this panel, which is an important one. This discussion is about domestic violence, but Canada would like to underscore the importance of addressing the notion of violence among intimate partners, which better reflects in current or past intimate relations. Anchored in gender inequalities and perpetuated by nefarious social norms, intimate partner violence remains one of the most widespread forms of human rights violations, and it has serious and lasting consequences on health, on safety, and on access to justice. It has a disproportionate impact on women and girls. Canada is implementing a pan-governmental approach aimed at strengthening support services provided to survivors and to address the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that exacerbate risks. In this context, Canada is proud of having announced yesterday the ratification of the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention and Punishment and Elimination of Violence Against Women. Canada would like to encourage all states parties to adopt comprehensive, integrated, and appropriately financed or funded strategies in order to effectively address intimate partner violence. Thank you. Thank you. I give to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Mr. Vice President, Vietnam welcomes the timely discussion on this topic and thanks the panelists for their insightful presentations. Domestic violence remains one of the most pervasive issues of the human rights globally. It undermines the promotion of gender equality, security, and development of societies, while also creating profound consequences for families and communities. Vietnam attaches great importance to preventing and combating domestic violence as part of our broader commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment. Guided by our Constitution, the law on gender equality, and revised law on domestic violence prevention and control, we have enhanced the public awareness, strengthened prevention measures, legal protection, and expanded support for victims of domestic violence. At the same time, we recognize that prevention of domestic violence requires addressing the root causes of this issue, including discriminatory social norms and inequality, while ensuring full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and girls in policy making and implementation. In conclusion, we reiterate our firm commitment in eliminating domestic violence and advancing the full enjoyment of human rights by all women and girls. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of France. Vice President, distinguished panelists, France would like to thank you for this annual discussion on domestic violence against women and girls. Such violence is not just a matter of the private realm. Such violence represents a manifestation of the structural inequalities between men and women and an obstacle to women's empowerment. But it is possible to act against such violences. France is working to address discrimination and gender stereotypes within schools in order to foster a culture of equality from a very early age. We also act to help the victims by providing temporary shelters, and we also address the perpetrators by taking measures to counter the commission of such reprehensible acts. Support for programs for combating sexual violence and gender-based violence run by UN Women and the United Nations Population Fund alongside partner countries is a contribution to this effort. France calls on states to never trivialize violence committed within the domestic or intimate sphere because of the dramatic consequences and long-term consequences for families. How can we take concerted action to eradicate domestic violence? I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Mr. Vice President, Ireland aligns with the EU statement and welcomes the focus of today's panel. Preventing and countering violence against women and girls is a domestic and foreign policy priority for Ireland. Without eradicating gender-based violence, we cannot achieve full gender equality or our shared objective of a more peaceful and inclusive world. Ireland is currently implementing a zero-tolerance strategy to tackle domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. Our third national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence recognises that violence against women and girls must be addressed by identifying the root causes of inequality, including the social and cultural norms that underpin violence against women and girls. Under the strategy, Ireland has established a dedicated statutory agency to tackle and reduce domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. Ireland also recognises that women and girls who experience multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination are at a heightened risk of gender-based violence, including those experiencing poverty, women and girls with disabilities, ethnic minorities, and members of the LGBTIQ+ community. We therefore support an intersectional and inclusive approach to addressing domestic violence against women and girls. Panelists, how can states better measure the impact of domestic violence prevention strategies, including those aimed at addressing the deep-rooted cultural and social norms that underpin domestic violence? Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I give the floor to Uruguay. Thank you, Vice President. Uruguay welcomes this panel and the very valuable input from the panelists. Domestic violence against women and girls is not a private matter. Rather, it is a serious human rights violation that is anchored in unequal power relations and social norms that perpetuate inequality and structural gender-based discrimination. At the national level, Uruguay has made progress through law number 19.580, which established a comprehensive framework for preventing and responding to gender-based violence. Similarly, the creation of an observatory on gender-based violence against women has strengthened the production and systemization of data. However, domestic violence remains a very widespread reality, one that is often under-recorded. We'd like to ask the panelists, what measures do you think are priority measures that we should take in order to ensure that available data lead to more timely, coordinated and victim-centered responses? Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished Deputy Ambassador of China.
先生，今天是国际女外交官。
Today is the International Day of Women in Diplomacy, marking women's outstanding contribution. We
extend festive greetings to all female diplomats. China welcomes the panel's focus on domestic violence against women and girls. China firmly opposes and strictly combats all forms of violence against women and has formed a relatively complete monitoring system to eliminate such violence. Anti-domestic violence law has established personal safety protection orders, allowing victims to apply for judicial protection having to file for divorce. On June 11, China issued the National Human Rights Action Plan until 2030, setting for the next 5 years milestones, objectives, and concrete measures for respecting, protecting, and promoting human rights. With women and children's rights as a key component, China will continue to improve protection system for women and girls. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the Tokyo trials, marking the trials of the crimes against comfort women. China urges Japan to reflect on these crimes and to resolve the legacy of these issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Senegal. Thank you, Vice President. Domestic violence remains one of the most widespread and persistent forms of human rights violations around the world. It transcends borders and cultures and levels of development, and it has a disproportionate impact on girls and women. This kind of violence is not limited to physical aggression. It can also take psychological, sexual, or economic forms which undermine the autonomy and self-esteem of victims and deprives them of the exercise of their fundamental rights. In keeping with our international obligations, in particular under the CEDAW Convention, Senegal is continuing its efforts aimed at strengthening prevention and victim protection, as well as access to justice and the fight against impunity. It is in this context that the law that criminalizes rape and pedophilia should be seen, as well as any act of aggression against a woman, and judges may no longer hand down suspended sentences for such offences. Eliminating domestic violence requires collective action in a way that gives priority to human rights, education, the countering of discriminatory social norms, women and girls' empowerment, and ruthless justice, because no society can fully exercise its aspiration. The chairperson interrupts and gives the floor to Colombia.
Gracias, señor vicepresidente.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome this panel and the opportunity to reflect about one of the most widespread and persistent forms of human rights violations around the world. Violence against girls and women in the domestic sphere continues to affect millions of people regardless of their age, economic status, origin, or nationality. This is a manifestation of structural inequalities and historically imbalanced power relations which limit the autonomy and freedom of women and their exercise of their human rights. The recurrence of domestic violence calls for a comprehensive response which combines prevention, protection, access to justice, and reparation for victims. At the same time, we need to strengthen care systems and ensure accessible and specialized support services and promote cultural change that questions discriminatory norms and other standards that perpetuate domestic violence. Colombia is committed to combating all forms of gender-based violence, and we call on states to share best practices and help us all move together towards societies in which women and girls can live lives in freedom and free from fear. Thank you. I give the floor to Sierra Leone.
President, my delegation aligns with the African Group statements and thanks the Deputy High Commissioner and panelists for their insightful and thoughtful presentations on states' obligations under international human rights law, best practices, ongoing challenges, and how this council can help eliminate this form of violence. Sierra Leone is upholding the commitments it made at the 2024 Global Ministerial Conference on Ending Violence Against Children in Bogota. These commitments include strengthening legal and policy frameworks, as well as enhancing support services to child victims and survivors, significant steps towards fulfilling our international and legal obligations to protect women and girls have since taken dramatic progress. And this includes the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act of 2022, the Child Rights Act 2025, and the Child Rights Act provides key safeguards against abuse, violence, harmful practices, and exploitation of children under 18, while promoting their physical and mental well-being. We call for an integrated approach that combines prevention, protection, access to justice, accountability, and support services. This approach requires coordinated action from the justice, health, social services, education, and housing sectors. These efforts must also ensure the meaningful participation of civil society and survivors in addressing domestic violence against women and girls. And I thank you, Vice President.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I give the floor to UNFPA. Thank you, Vice President. Domestic violence is a challenge for human rights that requires an urgent and coordinated and holistic response. Such violence is committed in the private realm behind closed doors, which makes it difficult to detect. This kind of violence is also exacerbated by intersecting forms of discrimination. Women and girls who suffer from exclusion, in particular those living in rural areas, and indigenous women, migrant women, and women with disabilities are even more vulnerable. UNFPA is striving to address gender-based violence in more than 150 countries. In order to help survivors, our response is built around social services, healthcare services, justice, and implementation of the law. We also apply prevention programs. UNFPA believes that domestic violence cannot be explained by a particular context. That is why efforts must also encompass humanitarian situations and peace efforts and digital platforms, and we support national authorities in their efforts to consolidate their institutional and legal framework and to criminalize domestic violence and address its...
Organización de la Conferencia.
I give the floor to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Thank you, Vice President. The OIC Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission, the IPHRC, expresses deep concern over the continued prevalence of domestic violence against women and girls across all societies and cultures. Domestic violence constitutes a serious violation of human rights and an assault on human dignity, family stability, and social cohesion. Islamic teachings categorically reject violence, abuse, and injustice within the family and emphasize mutual respect, compassion, and protection. The Commission stresses that effective responses require comprehensive legal, institutional, educational, and social measures, including prevention, protection, and accountability. The IPHRC particularly underscores the importance of awareness raising, access to justice, psychosocial support, economic empowerment, and community engagement in combating domestic violence. The Commission also highlights the growing challenges posed by online abuse and technology-facilitated violence targeting women and girls, which require strengthened legal safeguards and digital literacy initiatives. The IPHRC calls upon states and relevant stakeholders to strengthen cooperation, exchange best practices, and adopt victim-centered approaches that preserve human dignity, family well-being, and social harmony. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Zimbabwe welcomes the discussion on domestic violence against women and girls. We thank the panelists for their insightful discussions. Domestic violence remains a complex social problem affecting many women around the world. Not only does domestic violence inflict physical, sexual, and psychological harm to the victim, it deprives them of their freedom. Zimbabwe has strengthened legal and policy frameworks to prevent and respond to domestic violence against women and girls in alignment with the Constitution and the international human rights standards. Practical administrative measures and multi-sectoral institutional mechanisms are in place, including victim-friendly services such as toll-free lines, specialized courts, enhanced additional leader courts, police victim-friendly units, legal aid, and static and mobile one-stop centers that deliver survivor-centered services, even in remote areas. Engagement with communities alongside awareness campaigns is being intensified to address harmful social norms and root causes of domestic violence, with economic and social empowerment of women and girls being accelerated to build resilience. Zimbabwe remains committed to ending domestic violence against women and girls. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Moldova.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Despite progress made in the area of gender equality worldwide, violence against women and girls remains one of the most widespread human rights violations, with domestic violence being one of the most common and least visible forms. There is no doubt that more efforts are needed to combat this form of violence, both domestically and at the international level. Improving prevention, response, and protection of victims, as well as sharing of best practices, shall be at the heart of our joint efforts. The Republic of Moldova is making constant efforts to implement the provisions of the Istanbul Convention. Structural reforms have been carried out, including in the area of integrated data collection and monitoring, ongoing training of justice system professionals, and the implementation of modern risk assessment tools. Recent efforts have been made to amend legislation regarding digital violence, forced marriage, the introduction of the crime of femicide, and the strengthening of victim protection mechanisms. At the same time, the Republic of Moldova continues to pay close attention to preventing and changing social norms that perpetuate violence. While we are able to see improvements, we continue to recognize the challenges that still persist and reiterate our commitment to make steadfast efforts toward the elimination of and prevention of domestic violence against women and girls. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to the second block of the list of speakers from national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I'd like to begin by giving the floor to the National Human Rights Committee of Qatar.
Mr. President, Qatar reaffirms the importance of continuing international efforts to promote and protect the rights of women and to advance the principles of equality and non-discrimination, ensuring that women and girls fully enjoy their human rights and participate actively in the sphere of lives. The committee commends the legislative and institutional progress achieved in the state of Qatar in support of women's rights and empowerment, including promoting equal opportunities in education, employment, and participation in cultural life, alongside the continued development of legal framework and national policies aimed at protecting women and strengthening their role in society. At the same time, the committee recognizes that certain challenges remain, particularly with regard to increasing women's representation in the Legislative Council and elected local councils, as well as in decision-making positions. The committee also emphasizes the importance of strengthening protection against domestic violence, enhancing prevention, response, and legal protection measures, and improving the collection of relevant data and statistics to support informed policymaking and decision-making. Furthermore, the committee remains committed to promoting the development of national legislative and policies in line with international human rights standards, raising awareness of women's rights, supporting women's access to justice and effective remedies, and continuing cooperation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Musawa Global Berhat.
Musawa Global Vision.
Musawa Global Vision.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of Musawa, a global movement working towards equality and justice in Muslim family laws and practices. Every day, women, girls are harmed, controlled, silenced, and killed by those who are supposed to love and protect them. Child marriage, FGMC, marital rape, domestic violence, and femicides are not separate problems. They are connected manifestations of the same discrimination and inequality. This is a continuum of violence. Discriminatory family laws and practices can entrench these inequalities by denying women equal rights in marriage and family relations, restricting their choices and making it harder for them to escape violence and seek justice. States have a duty not only to respond to violence, but to transform the condition that allows it to flourish. This means eliminating harmful practices, reforming discriminatory family laws, and ensuring that culture, tradition, or religion are never used to justify violence against women and girls. States must take steps to address the continuum of violence by addressing equality within the family and ensuring that legal and religious frameworks becomes instrument of justice rather than barriers to it. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra la
Thank you. Plan International Inc. is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Today, I deliver this statement on behalf of Plan International Global Youth Ambassadors. Domestic violence continues to affect safety, dignity, health, education, and economic opportunities of women and girls across our communities. It takes many forms, including physical, sexual, psychological, and economic abuse. Despite existing laws and policies, many survivors remain trapped by fear, stigma, victim blaming, and economic dependence. Around the world, we witness how harmful social norms, gender inequality, poverty, and weak access to justice contribute to persistence of violence. In many communities, abuse is still treated as private family matters rather than a serious violation of human rights. As young people and community advocates, we know prevention requires collective responsibilities and stronger community engagement and youth-led awareness initiatives. Therefore, urge member states and relevant stakeholders to 1. Strengthen protection system, including mental health and psychosocial support service, as well as confidential counseling, safe spaces, hotline, and referral mechanism. Strengthen implementation and enforcement of laws addressing domestic violence and gender-based violence, and engage men and boys, community leaders, schools, and youth organizations in challenging harmful social norms and promoting respectful relationships. And last, ensure the meaningful participation of women and girls in shaping policies, prevention strategies, and community response. Domestic violence is not a private matter, it is a human rights violation. Thank you.
Gracias. Vamos a escuchar.
Thank you. Now we will hear a video statement from the Chinese Association for International Understanding.
A grassroots women's representative from Hong Kong. I'm Vice President of Hong Kong Federation of Women and the Chairperson of Hong Kong Island Women's Association. For years, I have wholeheartedly served the community and strive to advance local women's rights. As the UN affirms, gender equality and women's empowerment are indispensable to global peace and sustainable development. From frontline practice, we see real and steady improvements in Hong Kong's women's right protection. We provide annual free legal consultation, serving over 2,000 grassroots women, resolving family and asset disputes. Our yearly vocational training benefits over 1,000 mothers, empowering them with practical skills, stable employment, and true financial independence. We also hold monthly mental health workshops, easing their dual stress from work and family, and safeguarding their physical and mental well-being. Based on our experiences, I put forward 3 appeals. Uphold inclusive, targeted policies for grassroots women's practical demands. Boost female empowerment training for equal development opportunities. We call on the international community to acknowledge Hong Kong's real advances in women's rights. Thank you.
Now, United Nations Watch has the floor.
Our Civil Commission's report, Silence No More, was recently presented to you. Drawing on an extensive historical archive, we assembled the most comprehensive evidentiary record of the sexual crimes of October 7th and in captivity. For 2 years, we immersed ourselves in testimonies of unimaginable violence. We revealed 13 patterns of abuse, including rape, gang rape, sexual torture, and the deliberate mutilation of women's faces and genitalia. Victims were filmed while being tortured. Families were forced to see the suffering of their loved ones. We had to coin a new term, genocidal sexual violence, to describe the deliberate sexual torture of family members. This was terror made for visibility. Women's bodies became spectacles of war. This was also a calculated strategy repeated again and again. The truth is that Hamas created a blueprint for others to follow, putting women at risk worldwide. Finally, the question is no longer whether these crimes occurred, but what is the world going to do about it? Speaking for so many Israeli women who care about women's rights, we were heartbroken by your response. Where is the compassion? Will the UN rapporteurs who doubted or denied these crimes acknowledge the truth? Israeli victims were not merely abandoned, they were singled out, dehumanized, delegitimized. We are now left to face a world consumed by hatred and with an
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. The International Federation for Human Rights Leagues has the floor.
Mr. Vice President, FIDH welcomed this panel discussion on domestic violence against women and girls, a grave and pervasive form of gender-based violence that continues to require international attention. However, domestic violence does not occur in a vacuum, and this must be at the core of the response. This violence is the direct consequence of structural inequalities, discrimination, unequal power relations, and harmful social norms that continue to deny women and girls autonomy, dignity, and equality. In addressing domestic violence, we must therefore be careful not to isolate it from the struggle against gender-based violence. Treating it as separate risks returning to a time when domestic meant private and when violence within the home was left at the discretion of those in authority. The risk is particularly acute today. Across regions, anti-rights and anti-gender movements increasingly invoke family values and the protection of the family to undermine women's rights, sexual and reproductive rights, and gender equality. Behind this rhetoric lies a dangerous attempt to re-legitimize control over women and girls, in particular within the household. We call on states and on the Council to firmly reject these narratives, keep the broader picture in mind, and address the root causes. The response must be focused on prevention, accountability, and reparation for all forms of structural and systematic gender-based violence, including domestic violence, while ensuring holistic and survivor-centered services. Thank you.
Gracias. Esta ha sido la última.
Thank you. That is the last statement that we can include on our schedule. I would like to remind you that the delegations signed up on the list of speakers who were unable to take the floor due to lack of time will be able to upload their statements to be published on the extranet. Now, I'd like to give the floor once again to our panelists who can now make concluding observations. You have about 4.5 minutes each. I will begin with Ms. Patsali Toledo-Vazquez.
Muchas gracias, señor vicepresidente.
Thank you very much, Vice President.
To thank all interventions that show the wealth of responses to domestic violence by state members, from legislation, support services, protection measures, etc. However, I will take one of the questions that was reiterated among some of your interventions, how to ensure better coordination among agencies and even beyond, with civil society, academia, and other sectors. Because we talk about a whole of a state approach to gender-based violence, and including all sectors, justice, health, social services, etc., or even a whole of a society approach, because we know that it's not only state actors who should intervene, but also society as a whole. But what are the tools that we have to really make this domestic violence that is a social problem, how to make adequate social responses that go beyond the individual cases? So I believe that one of the models that I would like to emphasize today is, and also because I think that is a promising practice by some members and some territories, is the use of in-depth reviews of domestic homicide cases or femicide, intimate partner femicide. This type of in-depth reviews are an example from my perspective of how we can focus after a killing already happened. And that is a tragedy that we cannot avoid. That happened, but we still can learn lessons from that. Because in every case a woman is killed, we can identify what could have done better, what were the opportunities that maybe were missed before, not just in relation to providing protection for that woman, but also what were the missed opportunities to intervene with that man. In many cases, a woman is killed after other previous intimate partners were also abused by the same perpetrator. These previous experiences led to a final fatal victim, but the previous ones probably also have something to say in terms of their experiences. So for me, these opportunities of sitting together, all sectors, justice sector, law enforcement, education, schools, very often teachers are aware of dynamics of violence and that at the school gates, and they need to share what were their views and what they would like to have in order to prevent that from happening again. So I believe somehow these spaces of intervention, when we are joining together state agencies, including health, justice sectors, but not limited to that, healthcare, etc., and communities and families. Very often, as I say, families and social networks, or even perpetrators, co-workers of a perpetrators who might be aware that he was obsessed about his previous girlfriend, and they didn't know what were the resources. Those voices and those perspectives need to be heard in order to improve what we really understand by coordination. A coordinated responses is not something that we can simply design. It's something that we need to test every time we face those serious cases. Because very often when a woman is killed, the only response we hear, or the only explanation that is not an explanation, is she didn't report the violence before. And that is like washing our hands and saying nothing could have been done. And that is not an adequate response. We need to know that in every case, something could have been done better. Thank you so much.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you, all the delegates, for coming today and making very important interventions and contributions to our discussion. Delegates mentioned important international standards in this field, the importance of survivor-centered responses. They shared with us some examples of good practice, and I would also underline that I also found that a good practice is a coalition against violence. As a UN Women representative said, we have clear international standards and commitments, but we need to work on implementing those standards and recommendations at a national level. So the next step is really to focus on a national level. And states should rely on existing international standards, review their laws and policies, and work on their implementation, particularly on recommendations given by UN human rights mechanisms. And here data is really essential. States need reliable, disaggregated, and regularly updated data on domestic violence, on protection orders, breaches of protection orders, prosecutions, convictions, service availability, and also femicide that was mentioned. A due diligence response requires states to prevent, investigate, punish, and provide reparation for domestic violence. But it is not only prosecution after harm. It requires an integrated system, meaning trained police, prosecutors, judges, health professionals, social workers, and we also mentioned educators as a very important puzzle in this. It means also that women and girls need to have safe shelters, psychological support, legal aid, child-sensitive procedures and survivor centers approach, accessible services and economic support that allow survivors to rebuild their lives. And this segment is usually neglected in many policy areas throughout the world. One of the questions was how to contribute to the UN human rights system in cases that do not that and obviously we do not have all cases that can reach UN treaty bodies. And here I would like to underline that what is visible from cases decided by the CEDAW Committee on Domestic Violence, that insisting on visitation rights, not doing risk assessment, victim blaming, and negatively assessing the credibility of women in criminal cases usually lead to impunity, and sometimes it can also have a tragical consequence. But it is also true that not all of them, even on a national level, cannot reach the legal system. And in that regard, I would like to underline the complementarity of work with special procedures. Working group identifies cases of gender-based discrimination during state visits and consultations with organizations and individuals. And this section of our mandate is very important. We have also other tools at our disposal, such as providing technical assistance to states, and we invite delegates to engage further with the working group. And finally, when it comes to how to better collaborate when it comes to femicide, I would underline that every femicide represents a collective failure to act in time. It is rarely an isolated or unpredictable event, and in many cases there were warning gaps, previous reports, threats, patterns of coercive control, institutional gaps, or moments in when protection could and should have been activated. So this is why I absolutely agree that having better collaboration and also establishing permanent multi-sectoral coordination at national level is extremely important. But we also have other mechanisms and actors. And I would like to underline the importance of civil society organizations and crisis centers that are often the first to hear survivors, to understand patterns of abuse, and to identify where institutions fails. So using their knowledge in assessment, in shaping policies is something that I would like to underline as especially important. And of course, the role of academia in doing research is extremely important, but at the same time, independent expert mechanisms, including UN and regional human rights mechanisms, are also extremely important, and then can provide normative guidance, assess compliance with international standards, and keep pressure on states to act with due diligence. Thank you once again for this opportunity, and I wish you all the best in your professional endeavors, and especially in this area.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. Madam Misako has the floor now.
Спасибо большое. Thank you very much for all the ideas that were mentioned in this room today and the issues that were raised with a view to better organizing our efforts to combat domestic violence. I would like to try and respond to a few points that were raised during the questions. We're talking about interdepartmental activity, and of course that is a condition that is necessary in order to build an effective strategy for combating domestic violence. Kazakhstan today views this cooperation to be a carefully built system in which different state bodies and organizations work along the same rules, timelines, and responsibilities. In connection with this, we are currently developing a number of interministerial decrees which will order the algorithm for action on a specific issue. When it comes to providing support to the aggressor who's undergoing a psychological correction program, when it comes to providing support to the victims according to certain standards, all of this happens with the active participation of civil society, of course. And I would also like to say once again that every year we hold the Central Asian Conference, and on the 25th of November this year it will take place in Almaty, and one of the sessions will be focused on interministerial cooperation. If any of you would like to take part, then please, you are very welcome. And one other point I'd like to respond to is the role of international organizations. Of course, it is essential to broaden support for creating interministerial prevention mechanisms, including the development of crisis centers, programs for aggressors, and systems for protecting the victims. But this has to be done in close coordination with representatives of civil society. We have to move forwards together. The role of non-governmental organizations today is essential, and thank you very much. I wish us all luck in our efforts to combat domestic violence. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tiene a continuación.
Thank you. Madam Pamela has the floor now.
Thank you. I want to return to Salma, the 16-year-old girl from Sri Lanka. She's not here with us today, but I ask you to hold her in your minds, not as a victim, but as evidence. Evidence that the law failed her even before the violence began, that the system failed her when she wanted an exit route, that we failed her when we accepted for decades that certain laws and practices were too sacred, too complicated, or too sensitive to change. She survived, many do not. And it's not just within marriage and unions, right? Let's not forget elderly women, especially widows who face additional harms. We cannot protect women and girls from violence without denying them the conditions that make safety possible. And I think that's the key idea that I want to bring today. Dignity is possible if she can't leave. Autonomy is not enough if she has nowhere to go. And in responding to the questions from the floor about strategies, as already also highlighted by NGO colleagues, what the evidence demands is an approach that addresses the full architecture of a woman's life, from the family she's born into, to the laws and practices that govern her relationships, to the rights that protect her in the old age. Root causes, not symptoms, systems change, not isolated interventions. Nationally, this means reforming discriminatory family laws and discriminatory laws in general, and policies that recognize women as equal rights holders. Without a strong foundation of equal rights within the family, women and girls cannot break the cycle of abuse. When law and by proxy practices and norms treat women as equal autonomous individuals within the family, it sends a clear message for every household, every community, and every generation that follows. It means reforming our court systems and procedures so that justice is accessible and fair, not another obstacle. Even small reforms can change everything. In Spain, in 2005, a reform that made divorce faster and cheaper, spousal violence fell by 30%, not just among women who left, but also among those who stayed married. The law changed, the procedure changed, the power imbalance inside the marriage changed with it. It also means resourcing, amplifying, and collaborating with feminist movements, indigenous women's rights organizations, disability and migrant rights advocates, and SRHR and SOGI networks that work directly with the communities most affected. Those who are most affected by violence and the organizations and groups that work closely with them need to be at the center of a solution to address domestic violence. The question before this council is not what to do. The question is whether there's the will to do it. We call for coordinated action and urgent action at every level. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And with that, we have wrapped up our debate with the panel. I would like to thank the Deputy High Commissioner for the statements and for all the distinguished panelists. Thank you for your contributions and for the work you carry out every day. To all those who spoke during the debate, thank you also. We will now have a short technical break and then have the oral report on the UN strategy for inclusion of disability. Thank you.
Vamos a reanudar.
We will now resume our meeting. Please return to your seats.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you for toning it down, keeping silence. And we will now hear the presentation of the oral report on United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy pursuant to Council Resolution 55/8. It is my honor to welcome Ms. Peggy Hicks, Director of the Thematic Engagement, Special Procedures, and Right to Development Division, who will present the report. You have the floor, Ms. Hicks.
Gracias. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm pleased to present our annual oral report on the implementation of the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy as managed under Human Rights Council Resolution 55/8. UNDIS remains an essential framework for supporting implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, and ensuring that the United Nations leads by example in promoting the rights, participation, and inclusion of persons with disabilities. Our office remains firmly committed to those objectives, as disability inclusion is central to our efforts to leave no one behind. Building on our previous reports, UN Human Rights continued its efforts in 2025 to strengthen performance across the UNDIS accountability framework. This year, we recorded progress in 2 indicators. With these changes overall, OHCHR now exceeds requirements on 7 out of the 15 UNDIS indicators, reflecting sustained institutional commitment and progress across leadership, planning, policy, institutional setup, reasonable accommodation, evaluation, and joint initiatives. The 2 areas of progress for our office in 2025 included, first, Indicator 4 on institutional setup, where our rating improved from meets requirements to exceeds requirements. This progress reflects strengthened institutional arrangements and coordination mechanisms dedicated to disability inclusion. The Human Rights and Disability Advisor in our office continues to provide leadership across the office, supported by dedicated personnel and a growing network of disability focal points. In May 2025, OHCHR convened its first global meeting of the disability focal points from headquarters and field presences, creating an important platform for peer learning, coordination, exchange of good practices, and identification of actions to strengthen future performance. The second indicator in which we made progress is Indicator 15 on communications, where our rating improved from approaches requirements to meets requirements. During 2025, we undertook a comprehensive assessment of both internal and external communications, examining their accessibility, quality, and reach. This work enabled us to better align our communication practices with the convention and strengthen inclusive communication across the office. These 2 areas build on strong performance across 6 other indicators where United Nations Human Rights Office continues to demonstrate strong performance through receiving exceeding requirements ratings. So these areas with exceeding requirements ratings include, first, Indicator 1 on leadership. Since the adoption of the UN Rights Disability Strategy in 2020, disability inclusion has remained firmly anchored within the leadership structures of our office. The implementation of the strategy is reviewed annually by senior management and includes a clear accountability framework. In 2025, the strategy underwent a participatory assessment involving all responsible entities across the office. Senior management actively participated in the review process, ensuring that the findings informed remedial actions and future priorities. The High Commissioner and Deputy High Commissioner have continued to champion disability rights publicly and internally. During the reporting period, the Deputy High Commissioner engaged directly with representatives and organizations of persons with disabilities with youth disability advocates, reinforcing our commitment to meaningful participation. From my own personal experience, I want to attest that leadership is important not only at the organizational level, but also with dedicated managers and staff. OHCHR's progress in this area, frankly, could not have happened had it not been for the extraordinary commitment and vision of Facundo Chavez Peniles, our Human Rights and Disability Advisor. The second area of exceeds requirements is Indicator 2 on strategic planning and management. Our organizational management plan for 2024 to 27 embeds disability inclusion across all 6 pillars of our work, and identifies persons with disabilities among the groups facing heightened risks of exclusion and discrimination. Disability inclusion is reflected both as a specific area of focus and as a cross-cutting objective throughout our planning and programming framework. The third indicator is disability-specific policy and strategy. The UN Human Rights Disability Rights Strategy remains the principal framework guiding our implementation of UNDIS. Its annual review process ensures continuous monitoring, learning, and adaptation. The fourth indicator where we exceed expectations is indicator 7 on reasonable accommodation. The office has established policies, procedures, accountability mechanisms, and a dedicated budget to ensure the provision of reasonable accommodation for staff, experts, and participants engaging in our work. An evaluation conducted in 2025 confirmed the effectiveness of these arrangements and supports continued improvement. The next is indicator 10 on evaluation. Disability inclusion is systematically integrated throughout the evaluation cycle, from terms of reference and stakeholder engagement to reporting and recommendations. A comprehensive meta-analysis of evaluation findings from the previous planning cycles informed the development of our current organizational management plan and supports evidence-based improvements. And the final and the sixth indicator that exceeds requirements is indicator 12 on joint initiatives. Our office remains actively engaged in interagency cooperation mechanisms such as the Interagency Support Group for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Global Disability Fund, and the UNDIS Focal Point Network. During 2025, OHCHR participated in several joint programs addressing support and care systems alongside UN partners, including UNICEF, ILO, UNDP, UNFPA, and UN Women. Colleagues, in addition to these areas of strong performance, OHCHR maintained its ratings under a number of indicators where further progress remains necessary. We continue to meet requirements under indicator 14 on capacity development. Mandatory disability inclusion training has now been institutionalized across the office. As of 2025, 848 staff members, representing 59% of our workforce, completed this training. Continued follow-up is underway to increase participation and move towards full compliance. At the same time, several indicators for the office remain at the level of approaches requirements. These include indicators on consultation with persons with disabilities, accessibility, procurement, programs and projects, country program documents, and employment. While progress has been made in each of these areas, further work is needed to establish more systematic approaches, strengthen monitoring and accountability mechanisms, and ensure consistent implementation across the office. For example, OHCHR continues to engage regularly with organizations of persons with disabilities through a variety of mechanisms, including our partnership with the International Disability Alliance. However, we recognize the need for a more systematic and institution-wide consultation framework that enables more consistent engagement and stronger tracking of participation. Similarly, we have advanced accessibility assessments across our premises and operations, yet additional investments are required to complete accessibility improvements across locations and systems. In programming, country-level planning and procurement, we have strengthened guidance and mainstreaming efforts. However, further work is necessary to translate policy commitments into measurable and consistent outcomes across all contexts. Indeed, I would add, even in areas where we have been rated as exceeding requirements, ongoing attention and improvement continues to be needed, as is the case with reasonable accommodation, where the available solutions for persons with disabilities on our staff are not always sufficient to meet the need, and further thinking and changes may still be needed. To that end, to support continued progress, OHCHR updated its annual action plan in 2025, identifying concrete measures to strengthen implementation of all applicable indicators. The action plan remains a key tool for translating commitments into operational results and ensuring sustained attention across the office. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that maintaining accelerated progress requires adequate resources and dedicated capacity. While OHCHR remains fully committed to implementing the strategy, the pace of improvement is constrained by limited human and financial resources. Our ability to build systematic consultation mechanisms and strengthen operational support depend on sustained investments and specialized expertise. In this regard, the support of member states and partners would be instrumental in enabling OHCHR to accelerate progress and strengthen implementation across all areas of the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. Additional resources and strengthened cooperation would significantly enhance our ability to accelerate progress and fully realize the ambitions of UNDIS. This is, of course, a challenge across the entire UN system during this time of constrained budgets. It is essential, though, that OHCHR lead by example in UNDIS implementation. We also welcome the launch of the revised United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy 2.0. The updated framework represents an important opportunity to build on lessons learned, strengthen the accountability, and further advance disability inclusion across the United Nations system. OHCHR looks forward to engaging actively in the implementation of the revised framework. We remain committed both to maintaining the areas where strong performance has been achieved and to improving results in areas where further efforts are needed. Our objective is clear: to ensure that persons with disabilities are fully included in all aspects of the United Nations work, not as beneficiaries of our efforts, but as rights holders, partners, and leaders. Only through such inclusion can the United Nations or any organization achieve its true potential, drawing fully on the expertise, insights, and skills of persons with disabilities within our workforce. For these reasons, disability inclusion remains a strategic priority for OHCHR. Progress has been made, but our work is far from complete. Guided by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, and the voices of persons with disabilities themselves, we will continue working towards a United Nations that is fully inclusive, accessible, and accountable. The full report, together with its easy-to-read version, is now available on the OHCHR website. We encourage member states, organizations of persons with disabilities, and all interested stakeholders to consult these documents for further information on our performance and ongoing efforts. I thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks, for the presentation of this relevant report. We will now take a short break, 2 minutes, so please don't leave your seats, before resuming the interactive dialogue with the working group on the issue of human rights and transnational corporations and other business enterprises. This is work that was left over from yesterday's session and that we will resume once we have reshuffled the podium.
Bueno, muchas gracias por su paciencia.
Thank you for your patience. Distinguished participants, we will now continue the pending work, so the end of our dialogue with the working group on the issue of human rights and transnational corporations and other business enterprises. We'll continue with the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I'd like to give the floor, first of all, to Minority Rights Group. This will be a video intervention.
Mr. President, on behalf of Minority Rights Group, we welcome the Working Group's report containing its guidance on the right of Indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent in the context of business activities. As your report highlights, current implementation of free, prior, and informed consent in the business context is both inconsistent and insufficient. Indigenous communities have reported to MRG that their traditional governance structures are ignored or that they're excluded from dialogue with businesses entirely. These issues become even more apparent when considering intersectional impacts. The ongoing denials of Indigenous peoples' rights illustrate the need for a more robust approach that directly integrates free, prior, and informed consent in national legislation, including due diligence laws that explicitly mandate that businesses respect Indigenous peoples' rights throughout all stages of their activities, irrespective of state recognition of Indigenous peoples. We additionally want to highlight your observation that consultation should be in good faith and respect customary decision-making processes, which requires that Indigenous communities are provided with comprehensive, culturally appropriate, and accessible information. Corporate actors can no longer operate in an atmosphere of impunity. Free, prior, and informed consent is not a suggestion, but a requirement under international law. States, businesses, investors, and civil society must work together to institute strict processes to safeguard Indigenous peoples' rights in business activities. Thank you.
A continuación.
Thank you. The next speaker is representative of the Conselho Indigenista Missionario.
Mr. President, CIMI welcomes the working group's guidance on indigenous peoples FPIC in the context of business activities. The obligation to conduct consultations and obtain the consent remains on the state and cannot be privatized. And there is the right to say no. Violations in FPIC in Brazil are manifested in Bill 191 of 20 and Law 1471/23, both imposing the marco temporal and flexibilizing the right to consent. In the context of mega projects such as Belusan and Potas Altazes, communities allege interference and fragmentation of indigenous representation process, inappropriate meetings, the absence of their actual consent, and the imposition of cumulative impacts over peoples whose rights have been consistently violated. Those cases reinforce the state obligation to protect the rights of indigenous peoples in each and every step of the consultation process. It is imperative that the Brazilian judiciary, including the National Council of Justice, takes into account this guidance and apply it throughout the country in the different jurisdictions. We also call on the executive to adopt this guidance into the elaboration of its national action plan. Our solidarity to the Mura people and the peoples in the larger Xingu area. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. We will now hear a video from Shanxi Patriotic Volunteer.
各位代表，我会前研读了工作组提交的报告。作为中国唯一以爱国主义志愿者命名的社会组织发起人，必须就报告中涉及中国的内容发表观点。工作组涉及中国海外项目评述、问询与报告存在明显偏颇，不少内容过度采信带有立场偏见的单方材料，未经多方交叉核实，片面采信碎片化投
Vamos a
诉。
interrumpir la proyección del vídeo.
We need to interrupt the video because there is no interpretation. There seems to have been an issue with the microphone in the Chinese booth.
Si se consigue técnico que haya, se proyectaría más. Así que
We can wait until the technical problem is resolved and then we will play the video. So we will now listen to the next speaker, which is Fian International.
intervención en vídeo.
最近的主席、特别报告员。
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Special Rapporteur, I carefully read the report of the working group. As the founder of a social organization in China named Patriotic Volunteers, I must express our views regarding the content concerning China in the report. The working group's commentary, inquiries, and reporting on China's enterprises overseas projects show clear bias. They rely excessively on unilateral materials with ideological prejudices. These claims lack cross-verification, are based on fragmented complaints. Furthermore, the working group's work has been frequently disrupted by geopolitical interference and external pressure from certain Western countries. By simplistically categorizing local governance disputes and community interest divergences as human rights issues, the working group has formed one-sided and stereotyped judgments which deviate from original intention of independent mandate, the lifeline was special procedures lies in neutrality, objectivity, fairness, and prudence. We urge working group not to harbor prejudice against South-South cooperation, to avoid being misled by false information, and to resist external political pressure and geopolitical interference. We call on the working group to abandon preconceived positions and practice prejudicing and prejudging issues so as to promote sound development.
Thank you. Hoping that such technical issues will not reoccur, we will hear another video from FIAN International.
President, I read the statement on behalf of FIAN International and CORE, a Serbian civil society organization working on the environment. In eastern Serbia, in Bor and Krivel, as we speak, residents report demolitions and pressure to accept individual resettlement instead of a collective solution preserving the village and cultural identity. Blasting has damaged even the local cemetery and ancestors' graves. The working group's report shows how Serbia seeking corporations without state oversight, valid permits, and independent monitoring could lead to the displacement of 400 households, disproportionately affecting the Black and minority. We call the involved states to implement the recommendations of the working group, according to which mining operations shall not continue or expand without valid permits, independent monitoring, and the meaningful participation of residents and accountability. The situation in Bor shows that voluntary standards are not effective for human rights protection. We urge Serbia to adopt a law requiring all businesses to conduct mandatory human rights due diligence, including provisions for corporate liability and effective remedies, and support the adoption of a UN treaty ensuring liability across value chains for corporations and effective remedies. Thank you.
A continuación, tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Center for International Environmental Law.
CIAS thanks the working group for their report on agribusinesses and their guidance on the right of indigenous people to apply prior and informed consent in the context of business activities. The guidance on FPIC importantly emphasizes that the exercise of this should be free from coercion or undue influence or reprisal. FPIC is indeed intimately linked to indigenous people's right to defend human rights. The report on agribusinesses recommends that states must promote agroecological alternatives to fossil fuels and agrochemicals. The carbonization of food system must include phase out of fossil agrochemicals and a transition to agriculture that restores food and energy sovereignty of farmers and communities. The consolidation of power of agri-food companies and landholders and the geopolitical precarity of food system depend on a global supply chains, and fossil fuels are interrelated crises. It is not enough to simply engage indigenous peoples and other relevant groups in crafting food security programs and laws around food fraud. Rather, they must be at the center of the path forward with clear decision-making power. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We will now hear another video from Just Atonement.
Chairperson and distinguished members of the Working Group. Just Atonement, Inc. welcomes the Working Group's efforts to strengthen implementation of the right of Indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent in the context of business activities. Much of the guidance appropriately emphasizes respect for Indigenous peoples' inherent right to self-determination. In that context, we have grave concerns and express deep disappointment regarding paragraph 11 and respectfully urge the Working Group to strike it from the final text. The statement that the requirement to seek and obtain FPIC should not be interpreted as conferring a static or unconditional right to permanently block projects is not an accurate reflection of international law and is itself contradicted by the document's later sections. The right to self-determination includes the right to refuse. When the Sami people categorically rejected a proposed solar geoengineering project affecting their territories in 2021, their decision was respected as an exercise of self-determination. Paragraph 11 would inexplicably defy that precedent. We therefore strongly urged the working group to remove paragraph 11 through a corrective addendum and reaffirm, clearly and unequivocally, that respect for FPIC requires unqualified respect for Indigenous peoples' decisions.
Thank you. We will now have another video from Oithako. We welcome the recent adoption by Colombia of the Decree on Businesses and Human Rights, which marks a strengthening of the institutional framework. However, its implementation must contribute to ensuring that investment and business activities take place in full compliance with international human rights obligations. The report by the working group is particularly relevant for Colombia, where communities continue to report impacts by agro-industrial, forestry and mining projects on their territories, their lifestyles, and their ability to produce food against a backdrop of armed conflict and territorial dispute.
you.